Hello and welcome. While speaking to children about how to protect their body and their privacy can be an uncomfortable conversation for parents and for children. However, it is an incredibly important conversation to have. Now, here in Australia, state and territory governments have the statutory responsibility for protecting children from child abuse and neglect. However, there are separate jurisdictions between each state and territory, and this can result in some children falling through the cracks. So today, in particular, we are specifically addressing children living in rainbow families. Now, this is defined as any family with children which there is one or more LGBTIQA parents as one such demographic. So to discuss this topic today, we welcome our special guest, Karen Craigie, Prosper, also known as Project Australia's Executive Director. Now, Prosper is a multi-award-winning community organisation founded to support disadvantaged children and their families at home, at school, and in the community. Now, today, Karen is going to speak with us about how she had identified a unique gap in child safety programming and how it has been addressed with a tailored protective behaviours program developed especially and specifically for young children living in rainbow families. Thank you for joining us, Karen. How are you?
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's really wonderful to have an opportunity to talk to you today and to speak about this really important issue in the program that we've got happening.
Yes, and thank you for your time also. Now, I understand that Prosper Australia or Project Australia and Rainbow Families have developed, as I just mentioned, a number of age-appropriate child safety resources that are tailored specifically for children living in rainbow families, which we're going to speak about more in a moment. But just firstly, I would love to just understand, how do children from rainbow families face additional complexities in child safety? I mean, can you give us just some examples?
Absolutely. So there's a number of different issues, and I think the most fundamental thing is that all children are vulnerable to risks, and to anything we can do to increase their protective factors and reduce risk is really important. But there are some additional risks for young people in rainbow families. So the first is that they do and can face anti-LGBTIQA plus attitudes and behaviours, and that can take many different forms. So it may just be some negative attitudes that people have towards their family. It may be bullying that they experience, in addition to the sort of standard bullying that children can experience at school. There's also a sense amongst the community in terms of just the way that relationships can be more complex. So as an example, there are lots of children living in rainbow families who actually come from foster families or who have been adopted. And on that basis, they have extended families and they have perhaps some existing vulnerabilities if they've already come through the child protection system and now they're in a safe and wonderful rainbow family, but they may have other biological parents or other members of the family where they're dealing with some additional risks and things. So there's that as well. It's difficult to be a child of any age, and certainly as children get older, they can have concerns or embarrassment as well about their own identity. They can take some time to find out who they are. And that, of course, is compounded with some complexity when there's a lot of other things going on in your family. So certainly some additional complexities there for young people living in rainbow families.
So how are those complexities and issues not typically covered in traditional child protection programming then?
So, look, essentially, the content that we have created is by and large suitable for all families because it's really relevant for any child to understand how they can protect themselves, to understand the importance of building networks and things. But not every child has to go to school, for example, and face homophobic behaviour because of their parents. So knowing what to say, knowing about allies and supporters, about specific networks, having some support around you and some idea that you're not alone, that can be really valuable to a young person who is experiencing, yes, what a lot of young people do experience, but also that additional layer. And so that's really what we've tried to address. So by and large, the content of our programming as an organisation that works with children and families across the board, is very generalised and certainly suitable for anyone to pick up and use. However, we have made the extra effort to just add on some extra bits and pieces that will help young people in rainbow families. So those extra bits and pieces really are where things will differ.
Okay, that's brilliant. And we're going to sort of dig deep into some of that information in just a little bit. But before we do that, I just wanted to acknowledge that we had published your article. Now, the title of that is New Program to Help Children in Rainbow Families to Stay Safe. Now, for someone who hasn't read the article yet, can you please tell us what it's about and, of course, what inspired you to write it?
Absolutely. So I wrote the article because my organisation has partnered with Rainbow Families, and Rainbow Families is a peak organisation in New South Wales that supports families with children that are from the LGBTIQA+ community. And we have been working on a project that I can certainly talk about at great length. And we had just released this new package of resources and materials. And so really important to use your wonderful resource to get the message out to others. So that's really why we wrote the article. But behind that is the deeper issue that we were identifying that there were extra needs and complexities, as we've just discussed, that children living in rainbow families can face. Now, the project that we're working on is broader, and I can speak to that further in the conversation. But in terms of just managing how we deal with children and support them, we really wanted to tailor something that's very specific for young people living in rainbow families. So that was the motivation for our programming and also for the article.
Yes, and we're partnered with Rainbow Families as well, who
Great organisation.
absolutely brilliant, and love the team, and definitely do everything that we can to support their incredible work. Now, in general, building resilience and protective factors in young children and young people, of course, is a valuable, of course, to
Yes.
their supporting their long life well-being. I'd love to know from your perspective, why do you think it's important for parents just to discuss child protection at home and have this as a general conversation that is an open conversation?
Absolutely. And really, the fundamental reason is that when children don't have those conversations at home, either one of two things happen. So they don't get the information at all, or they get their information from the wrong sources and they end up connecting the wrong dots.
Uh-huh.
And that can be very confusing. And in an age of information overload, we don't want to watch TikTok to find out how young men and women should, have respectful relationships. That's really not where young people should be getting their protective
Absolutely.
behaviours and their sense of respectful relationships and how to communicate effectively with people. So parents are the first teachers, and it's absolutely imperative that we take control of the content that our children get in this context. So yes, children will have some programming at school. It's written into the PDHPE curriculum across the country. So all children will deal with some sort of protective behaviours
Yes.
programming at some point. However, like anything, maths, English, language, whatever it is, if you do work at home and if a parent is involved, it just enlivens the content. It becomes more relevant and it becomes more real. And when it comes to protecting children, really, sadly, the place they are the most vulnerable is in the home.
Yes.
So that also adds an additional layer, and that makes things challenging because, of course, there are some families in which they will not touch this content because it is, of course, they are perhaps a bit more vulnerable and they may not recognise that there's a problem. So we have certainly tried to support all families, but recognise that we're a part of a broader system that needs to work together. So we need to work with schools, with organisations, with the community, with policymakers,
Yeah.
and also with children, with families themselves, to attack this and to have a multi-pronged approach so that we can, over the long term, prevent violence against everyone.
And in saying that, prevention work is so important, and of course the attitudes and behaviours that lead to violence are often learned from others. So do you
They
think that
are.
by parents fostering like protective practices in the home, that their children will that it will prevent children becoming a future victim or perpetrator of violence overall.
Absolutely, Rachel. And that's really critical to mention because there's two sides, of course, to violence, and there's lots of different
Of
perspectives on
course.
it. So we are trying to, create programming that can support parents
Yes.
because, as you've just said, it's not just about preventing your child from being a victim of violence. It's actually about teaching attitudes and behaviours
Hmm.
that help young people to grow up in a way where they can be not only tolerant of different perspectives and things that they don't agree with, but actually deeply respectful and understand difference and feel completely comfortable with everyone as they are and accepting of that. So parents have a lot to do with that.
Mm.
And we can find ourselves in a situation where, in theory, as a parent, yes, you agree with protective behaviours entirely and you want your child to be safe, but you don't realise that the way you talk about particular groups in the community or the attitudes you speak about in the house or the way you speak to your partner is
Mm.
actually sending a mixed message. So
Absolutely.
really important that we do everything we can, not just to work with children, but also to support parents in understanding, okay, you know what, maybe I do need to watch my language, or maybe I do need to find nicer ways of communicating with my partner so that
Yes.
I'm backing up what we'd like children to know all along.
Yes. So how does this help create the conditions then that make violence less likely to occur in the first place then?
Absolutely. So, what we know is that in households where there is already violence,
Hmm.
or where there is intolerance, or where there are a range of other vulnerabilities, the risk of any form of violence is increased. And our broader project is not just about child protection, it's actually about reducing violence in general, with a specific focus on reducing violence against women and children. And so, it's it's really important to understand a little bit of context.
Mm.
Um, Having said that, what we're trying to do really is focus on bringing out some clear and specific strategies that everyone can use, so that we are creating an environment where risk is reduced. So if parents are identifying, okay, you know what, maybe I do need to change the way that we do things in the house, or perhaps we do need to spend some more time talking about certain things, because some families
Okay.
find things difficult to talk about. Even basic things like being okay with the expression of emotion. Like, a lot of parents get really triggered when their child sort of sooks about something
Hmm.
or whines about something. But actually, when children have a problem and they feel like they want to express a frustration or whatever a negative emotion it is, if parents shut that down,
And don't acknowledge it
then
and validate it.
absolutely, then that can be a problem over time. So
Of
what we're trying
course.
to do is create that environment. Now, when we have a home where there are additional risks, or where parents aren't open to these conversations, or children aren't connected to other networks, that means that when there is a problem, children may not talk to parents about it. They may feel afraid to mention that they've had an issue because perhaps they get in trouble every time
Well,
they
because if they
they
can't
try
talk
to
to them
speak
about
up.
small things and I'm upset for whatever reason, something happened at school today or what have you, what's the likelihood they're going to open up about something big? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also, very specific things like making sure children understand, okay, well, who do I talk to?
Hmm.
Not only who do I talk to, how do I talk to them? So really trying to build up these factors, because yes, what we know is that as you reduce risk factors and increase protective factors, there is a much reduced likelihood of violence occurring now and in the future.
Okay.
And sadly, Rachel, this is a really long-term view. So those working in violence prevention are looking at creating change that we may actually not see for 50, 60 or 70
For
years. So
generations to
we're
come.
looking,
Yep.
it is, it's really starting now to change attitudes and work on this in the long term. So
Okay. So,
we recognise it needs to happen over time.
but let's say now parents want to start making the change. So, where do parents start if they choose to start wanting to discuss personal protective and child safety at home with their children? I mean, what are maybe some simple protective behavior strategies that parents can teach their children? Is there anything that you can share with us at the moment?
Absolutely. So I guess the main thing is that parents shouldn't be concerned about starting. Just jump in, start anywhere. There's lots of materials available.
Hmm.
The important thing is that once you make a decision, you just stick with it with your young person. So the first thing really that is, really critically important for young people is that they do have a support network. Sounds silly. We all think that our children have friends, they have adults, people in their life. What we know is that the person most likely to harm a child is actually someone that they're close to. So we
Yes.
encourage parents to work with children to identify 5 trusted adults that a child feels comfortable with. Very important, the child has to feel comfortable with approaching this adult. The parent might not even know who the adult is. It might be a staff member at school, or something someone that the parent doesn't know too well. That's not a problem as long as the child feels comfortable approaching. We want a couple of people in the family, but we also want people outside of that immediate family network in that network for young people. And I'm holding up my hand of 5 because we actually call it a helping hand. So 5 contacts, very simple visual for children, to create a network of contacts. These are people that they can approach when they're in trouble. And it sounds so simple, but actually so many children try to reveal that something's happened to them, try to alert an adult, and the adult just doesn't hear or isn't expecting it, so doesn't recognise those signs. So trying to support your child by helping them develop a network of trusted adults, teaching them how to say no. And we all know adults, Rachel, that can't say no. People really struggle to say no to others. Now, if you're a child or a young person and an adult is asking you to do something you don't feel comfortable with, it's very hard to say no for different reasons. Young children might not know how to, say no, and older children just might be totally embarrassed or absolutely frozen in place and not know how to respond, or they might want to conform to peer pressure. They might want to, be included. They don't want to feel excluded. So teaching young people to say no, really important. And also teaching people how to ask for help and trust their instincts. And we do that, or parents can do that through really recognising and accepting young people's emotions and helping them to recognise those emotions themselves by using language to describe things, by noticing how other people are showing their body language. What's the look on their face? Oh, you must feel sad today, or you look really happy today. That sort of thing, really verbalizing emotions for children and young people. So
It is,
there's some basic things.
and I understand it's very important for parents to use the correct language for body parts as well. And is that something that I mean, I would love to. I mean, parents speaking to children about personal protective behaviours is a difficult conversation for any parent, and
It
we
is.
acknowledge that. But I'd love to understand a little bit more about how Prosper has made these conversations easier for parents to have open discussions on the topic. And in particular, I mean, is there anything about the program that you can tell us that the parents can implement in their home as well?
Absolutely. So look, essentially what we've done is we've tried to make it very easy for people. We have a resource for parents specifically. And really what this does is it talks about a framework for utilising program materials that we provide. And it's very descriptive. So reading through our parent resource is very clearly indicates, okay, well, this is how much time you're going to need. These are the resources that you should use for whatever age you have. So we've tried to make it as specific as possible, and then putting in place for parents some content that we really want to be thought-provoking. We want parents to reflect on their own circumstance and say, okay, we do really well at this, and these are all our great protective factors. What are some of the risk factors, or what are some of the things that we can improve on within our household? And that's very tailored to each person. So when we're talking to parents, we're not wagging the finger, we're trying to just get parents to reflect on their circumstances. We then have resources for each age group. And the resources are there specifically so parents can just take them off the internet and either use them online or print them up and use them with young people. So for very littlies, for sort of under school age, so preschool age, we have very simple colouring in activities. We have our helping hand activity to help young people identify 5 people that they trust and can approach if they need help. For primary school age children and for high school age children, we have 2 separate workbooks, and they are designed to take young people through specific strategies and concepts, because a lot of this stuff is very conceptual, and it's
It
hard, for
is.
example, to talk to someone about what does feeling afraid mean to you, what is safe, what is unsafe.
Mm,
And we do that with a simple exercise by just helping young people to think about, okay, what is a smell that makes me feel safe? It might be cookies baking. It
yeah,
might be the smell of flowers or their mum's perfume. But what's an unsafe smell? That might be a fire, or the smell of blood or something like that. And then we do that with all of our senses. So very simple activities that are broken down into small workable tasks, so
hmm,
that young people can just work at a pace they feel comfortable at with their families. So we've tried to make it very easy to implement. It's simply looking at the content, doing a little activity, and for parents, certainly of younger children, they will need to drive this approach. But for
yes.
older kids, they can actually probably work through it themselves. And with some of the resources for older children, some of the content actually is quite complex. It does talk, for example, about dating and violence in dating and things, which are maybe things that a young person doesn't necessarily want to have a conversation with their parent about. And that's okay, but parents do need to check in with their young people
Well,
if they are using these materials.
yeah, and I want to speak about that in just a moment, but I wanted to know initially also, I mean, how important is it that parents understand the key messages and the content before having the conversations with their children as well?
It is important because we think that children know. We think they understand safe and unsafe. We think, yes, of course, my kids know to come to me if they've got a problem. That's not that's not the case. You
Mm,
don't know what's in your child's mind. You don't know what the context of their experience is, and you don't know the messages that you may be sending your child that may actually be contradictory to the words that are coming out of your mouth. So
hmm.
really important that we all understand as parents what we're actually going to be talking to our child about. And I certainly encourage parents, if there are concepts that you're actually not familiar with, and look, let's face it, in this day and age, there's certainly some things going on in social media that we may not always be completely on top of or understanding. So we've put a lot of resources in there to help parents really get a grip with the content. It's not complex stuff. This isn't rocket science,
Mm,
but it is important if you're going to be talking to young people, for example, about anti-LGBTIQA plus behaviour, if you're going to be talking to young people even about the concept of safety,
mm.
that we understand it ourselves, because it's not something that can easily be defined. Many of these things require you to work with your child so that they can build their own understanding. So really important that parents have a good grasp, but also don't be intimidated by it. It's not difficult. This is just a lot of common sense, but certainly keeping us in touch with what's going on, and reminding ourselves as adults that these are skills that are really good for family and personal resilience and personal safety.
So, in saying that, how can parents then best implement the content from the resources? I mean, how much time should they be putting aside as well?
Absolutely. So look, we would suggest that this is a process that parents really continue throughout a child's life. It doesn't matter if you're starting young or when your child's already, in their teens. If you want to run the program from start to finish, it will take usually between about 4 to 6 sessions for the younger kids' content, and up to 8 to 10 sessions for the older kids' content. However, what we're talking about here is not an hour-long lesson. We're talking about bite-sized chunks of information that parents can work through with their kids in maybe 10, 15 minutes. With the older kids, it's more about having a conversation or just checking in with your child to make sure that they're okay and they understand what they've read, the content that they've worked through. With younger kids, there's simple activities, a colouring in sheet. This should certainly be seen as something that parents can do very easily over a number of weeks. Or, we've got the next school holidays coming up soon, the big one at the end of the year. Perfect time to just have a conversation with your child once a week and say, okay, well, let's just use this opportunity to talk about something really important. And it might be something that we don't discuss normally, but we're going to start discussing being safe in our house. And
as
here are
well.
some of the ways that we can do it. So it's really up to parents. If you sat down and worked through stuff with your child, you can get it done in a few hours.
Mm.
Or if it's a young, with the young kids, we're literally talking colouring sheets and a 5-minute activity. It's not lengthy stuff. But we tend to, we would suggest this isn't something to sit down and do. It's not like reading a book all at once. So it's just a little bit here and then a little bit next week. The idea is it is actually learning and teaching skills. If you're learning a new language, if you're learning a new skill, you don't just go to class one day and then you have everything that you need in your head. You actually need to revisit it over a period of time and check back in. So really try to, we're encouraging parents to work on things over a bit of time. So certainly the school holidays coming up at the end of the year, that's a really good passage of time, which would let parents not only cover this stuff easily with their child, but their children work through it, but also just revisit it and reinforce concepts. And we do encourage families to check back in with this content regularly.
So it's really sort of breaking down barriers and making it a very free flowing conversation, an open, comfortable conversation in the home is what I'm hearing. And I'm hearing also, so parents should remind their children that it's okay to ask questions as they're learning as well,
Very much.
and for them to
Absolutely.
stop if it, I guess anything that's mentioned sort of makes them feel uncomfortable as well, I would say. Is that right?
Very much, very much. I
Yeah.
mean, some of the content where we certainly with the older children, some of the content we are presenting things that may have happened to a child, such as bullying. Lots of kids experience bullying. It might be really difficult for them to talk about bullying, or to, if they've just come off a school term that's been difficult, they may not want to sort of plunge back into that. But really important that we do teach children to have those strategies. So if your child is feeling uncomfortable with the content, or they don't want to go there, that's fine. Just leave it. Come back to it. We're not forcing this stuff
So
on the
how
children.
often should parents check in with their children after they've had a conversation as well?
Absolutely. So we really do recommend that, every couple of years your child is looking at this entire package of content again. And that's really because they will likely have moved into another stage. So they might start as a very young child doing the preschool activities, and then within a few years they've moved on to more complex ideas. So certainly every few years they should be re-looking at the whole package, which won't take very long if you've already done it before. But if we're checking in, it should be quite regularly. Just check in with your child, have a conversation once a month or so. Now, do you remember who are the 5 people in
So,
your network that
so
you should
repetition is
approach?
really needed then. Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. So, checking in and having those conversations.
Yeah. And possibly even make a calendar note every month or so to check in and to talk
Yeah,
to your children about what has happened in the past, what they learned, what they've remembered, and things, as you were mentioning before, about the warning signs and the safety signs. So just to remind them how and where to get help if they need it as well.
absolutely.
Just as you said, it's
Absolutely.
something that we just don't have one conversation and leave. It's a repetition is sort of really needed, would you say?
It certainly is. Yep.
Okay, wonderful. And the ages that the program is broken into, you mentioned it very briefly before, but from what age can parents start implementing and teaching this program as well?
Sure. So realistically, parents can, from the time your child is born, you can start doing things in the home that encourage children to grow up with the right approaches that will help them with their protective behaviours. As an example, making it okay for a child to cry or have a negative emotion without tut-tutting or telling them to stop sooking or anything like that. So really, from the word go, from the time your child is born, you can use the materials and really work in some of the content into your home environment. We have set up the first resources to be for children that are old enough, to colour in. So once your child is able to colour in, they can start using our colouring materials, and that's designed for preschool age children, but it can be, any child under the age of 5 or 6 who's able to colour in. Then we have primary school aged children, and a package of resources that is suitable for them. And we have high schoolers. Now, of course, there are some high schoolers who are in the very lower years of high school who actually are probably developmentally or socially a little bit less in high school than their physicality. So if you've got a child who is not developmentally ready for the high school content, or not developmentally ready for the primary school content, then just use the package of resources below that. So the preschool content or the primary school content.
And I did
really
actually open up some of the information. That it's very user friendly as well, and it's broken down.
I hope so, yes.
It is very much so. And I noticed that there is something called the POSH approach in the program. So I just love really briefly, if you could just quickly just touch on what that is, and I guess as more of an introduction, I guess, to anyone watching and listening as well. So what is this POSH approach?
Absolutely. So that's the acronym that we use to just basically give parents a framework for teaching protective behaviours, and more importantly, to creating an environment that is safe and encouraging for children. So the first, the P is personal protective factors. That's really just teaching children the protective strategies in the programming. The O is for opportunities, and that is using a whole range of everyday opportunities as learning experiences for young people. It can be as simple as just, if you're at a park and your child is safe, but perhaps they're potentially, with another child trying to decide who's going to get onto that piece of equipment. We're going to just leave your child to figure it out themselves, give them an opportunity to learn negotiating skills. Mm-hmm. The S is for safe people and places. So it's helping your child by not only auditing your own home environment, your own family environment, but just, okay, where are they going every day? They're going to school, they're walking to the bus stop, they're going to after school care, whatever it is. What are the key things that they should know on the way to school? Who are the people and the places that can help them stay safe in that environment? And H is for home. And that is really just what you're doing in the home, in your family environment to support children. So that POSH approach, POSH, personal protective factors, opportunities, safe people and places, and home, just a framework for parents to use to teach protective behaviours.
Awesome. Now, we've covered a lot in this chat today. I guess if you were to summarise overall, I guess your key messages for anyone watching and listening on this topic, what would they be?
Start young and make it fun. When you're teaching young people protective behaviours, this isn't scary stuff. It's simply skills that young people can use all the way through to adulthood, that can just help them to stand up for themselves, increase their protective factors, reduce their risk factors. So don't be intimidated by it. Just dive in, use the resources that we've provided, and particularly if you're in a rainbow family, they're specially for you.
Yes. So how can families access a program then?
Downloaded straight from our website, and certainly from the article that I wrote on your blog. So our website is prosperprojectaustralia.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much today for highlighting, the additional complexities children living in rainbow families face. And it's a really important reminder for us to be mindful about these issues, and also everything that your program provides parents, because as mentioned, it is a very uncomfortable conversation to have, but when a program is developed specifically to help break down those barriers and just to make it easy and as much as possible to make it fun and age appropriate, there's really no reason why parents shouldn't be having these conversations at home. Exactly. So really grateful for your time. Now, if anyone's got any other questions, and of course, we're going to have all of those links to your website and everything else in our show notes. But if anyone's got any other questions, where can they find you guys?
So we're all over social media or on our website, or you can just shoot us an email, mail@prosperprojectaustralia.org, and we'll answer.
Karen, this has been a wonderful chat, and I'm really grateful for your time. Thank you. And our door's always open, so I hope for another chat again in the not too distant future. But congratulations on all the wonderful work you're doing. Thank you for your time. Take care.
Thanks a lot, Rachel. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye.
Bye.